Welcome to What Matters to People, uncovering stories, trends, and connections that unlock greatness in brands.
Hi there, folks. This is Dave McCaughan, and with my partner, Steve Sowerby, we're the hosts of What Matters to People. Well, why that title? Well, we were talking over the last 25 years about how we explore and understand what people are about, what matters to people, and how that's the most important thing to marketers. So really what we were trying to do with this podcast is to ask different people from different countries around the world about life stages and people and what's important, and to try and help us figure out how marketers can take advantage of that when they're thinking about targeting their product, etc. It's Steve.
Hi, thanks, Dave. Welcome again to What Matters to People. And it's a real pleasure to have a friend on here. So Shannon is joining us, and I was really interested to meet Shannon because she has had multiple experiences in different fields, and especially recently with teenagers and university students in Thailand. But before we go into that detail, I'll ask Shannon just to introduce yourself and just give us a little flavor of your background and your experiences. Shannon.
Okay, cool. So thanks, Dave and Steve, for having me, and Sita as well. So brief stint, born and raised in America, am Thai, moved back to Thailand quite a while ago, started my career in finance. Then in the last 10, 15 years, have been in tech. That's really when I got to explore and really deep dive and focus in technology. Specifically, a company called Lazada, which is Southeast Asia's Amazon. And so when I was at the tech company, that was really when I had my first employment, and we could talk about this later, with I had to hire millennials and Gen Z and et cetera. Then started my own e-commerce, exited that one. It was a woman e-commerce. Then was a VC for Southeast Asia and China for about 4 years. Was a shark on Shark Tank Thailand. So people like to hear that. That was really fun. And then in most recent years, as Steve has mentioned, I just started teaching at Chulalongkorn University. So I've been deep in the weeds with 18-year-olds, helping them come up with their tech entrepreneurship ideas, startup ideas, and trying to figure that out with him. And I think in the last 2 months have been involved in a senator race, which I am now out of. So yeah, that's kind of the brief 20-year experience.
Oh, fantastic. What a variety. What experience. That's amazing. Well, with all of that, let's get into what did you learn about insights around the Thai youth specifically? What, especially in this last stint at Chulalongkorn University, as you're helping these 18-year-olds develop their ideas and innovations, what was it that you uncovered that you said, wow, okay, this is the way that our youth is really starting to think and what they need?
So I also teach the same course to professionals. So people who are in their late 20s and 30s, and there's stark like differences. The biggest thing, I guess a few, but the biggest thing off the top of my head is the fact that they want purpose, they want to be heard, they want to have a voice. And in comparison, the older generation doesn't want that so much. They want to be sure and everything. But here, when I was working with the 18-year-olds, they're like, no, this is what I want to fight for. Like, for example, one team was fighting for the high sugar content in flavored drinks nowadays. And they were just so adamant on it. And then they used everything in their power to wrap around that whole entire purpose, which had to do with digital, which had to do with other resources. Oh, my mom knows this and my dad knows that, and digitally this, and then offline we could do this and experiment with that. And I think they really wanted to make a mark. And that really stuck out to me, the not just boldness, but the fact that they were just so ingrained in their purpose and in their mission, and how hard they worked towards it in a month to come up with a real true product and how to market it and everything. So yeah, I think the perseverance and the dedication and the resource they have at their hands and the knowledge they already have was really stood out.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting as you say that, because as we talked about before we started recording, one of the reasons Steve and I started this series was our interest in what we call life stages, and the fact that historically everybody goes through what we would say are 4, 5, 6 life stages. And of course, as we're all living longer, maybe the last couple of life stages are spreading out a bit more. But one of the interesting things is I've been studying this subject for about 40 years now across Asia Pacific. And one of the things that really struck me from the early days was what I would call identity builders. So we'll say 15 to early 20s, right? So exactly the kids that you've been teaching. And that what's interesting is that every single generation, and Shannon, go way, way back to when you were 18, and wherever you went to college or whatever you were doing at 18, I'll guarantee you were pounding the table and there was purpose, and this is right, and this is the thing that must happen. And I know when I was 18, it was protesting against the Vietnam War, getting arrested for that, protesting against the oil industry, getting arrested for that. The thing is that that's the nature of being sort of that age group, and that's why we sort of, going back 25 years ago, I started calling it the identity builders. I mean, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about, you know, X, Y, Z generations. There's that identity building thing of, wow, we've got to change the world, or we've got to do this, or this is wrong, and so we've got to change it. And I love the way you mentioned it's the self-belief around a purpose. And of course, the generation you're teaching at the moment has access to a lot more and easier access to information and all those sorts of things, and maybe ways to do things online and activate than certainly, you know, when I was 18, because you were lucky if you were under television. So, you know, forget that. But it's really interesting. And I'd love to hear a bit more about, as you're thinking about that age group, you know, what is it that you think is the big issues at the moment that they're really thinking about? You mentioned the sugar thing, and I know that's an issue for some, but what are the big issues that young people are really thinking about and getting worked up about and want to do something about?
Oh, wow. So this specific class, we had a problem statement for them. Like, what do you want to change? You know, what problem is there in the world? And we got everything from food waste. We got, mental health was a big one.
Interesting.
Big one. At least 5 or 6 teams, and they had different ways of trying to solve it. Some of them were grief. Some of them were talking to an AI chatbot. We used to call it Tamagotchi.
Yes.
Right? So nowadays it's like this AI bot thing. So it's interesting to see how these ideas reincarnate all over again. And like I even asked them to watch the movie called Her, or was it She?
She.
Oh, she, yes.
Phoenix,
Joaquin Phoenix, yeah.
And so it's interesting to see all that all over again. But yeah, a lot of social causes. When I was doing the senator, really briefly, I got really thrown into people's beliefs on democracy. And, I mean, if you know Thailand, and I'm not going to say much here.
Oh, of course not. Yeah.
And when we know Thailand, democracy is very, very top of mind. Very top of mind. And there's many, many different, what's the word for it, rules and how people think democracy is. Some of them are like the right to choose, or everybody has an equal right, or for example, LGBTQ and all of that. But then there's also that everybody should be equal in terms of all classes and what that means. And so when this age group has that forum, very forceful, very, very, and sometimes it worries me a bit. I have to be frank. That was my stint in democracy, still in it, still trying to navigate that, but it's a big, it's a big, what's the word, wave right now, sweeping Thailand.
Right.
That's an interesting, sorry, Steve. That's an interesting thing that you raise. I mean, welcome to middle age, Shannon, if you're starting to worry about that, right? So, and the way they younger people are reacting to it. I'm wondering, when you look at things like that and the way in which, so you mentioned, you were a shark judge as well, right? And so all around the world, wherever Shark Tank exists in its different iterations, what's always more interesting to me, because of what I do, is, to be honest, I almost never listen to what the judges say, what the sharks are. I couldn't care less. I'm more interested in the way in which people present their idea, because that's the business that I've been in, and I guess Steve's been in, right? So, but I'm just wondering, what are you noticing about the way in which young people are presenting these ideas? I mean, passionate, yes, but what else is there?
Much more innovative, just because Shark Tank and in my VC experience is the same, just talking to people who have business ideas and me trying to vet if it's investable. I mean, that's basically my job. And I can tell the difference between the different ages and everything. The innovation and the creativity is a lot more, obviously, when you're younger. Although, as an investable company, the 40s actually have the fiscal responsibility.
Yeah.
And so it's very different, right? It's okay, presentation probably better, but then they might not have all the frameworks together, right? They don't check all the boxes. So for me, it's very, I always think and fall down to the fact that nobody is a Mark, it's very hard to find a Mark Zuckerberg, 22-year-old Mark Zuckerberg, right? So no matter who you are, it's going to be very hard. So there's a ton of people who try to market themselves that way. And unfortunately, there just aren't too many of that. And I think that's how people are trying to market themselves on Shark Tank, and sometimes when pitching to the VCs.
Right.
That's a good example. One of the things that I noticed, and I'll give you, going back, so in the late 90s, I start this Asia-wide research program. And one of the things we used to do was simple question. We did this with in-depth interviews and focus groups with people of all age groups. But one of the things we do was, okay, if you could meet one person for an hour, who would it be? Now, it's hard for us to imagine now, but across the whole of Asia, from Pakistan to Japan, Indonesia to Korea, if I ask people from 15 to 25 that question for about 5 years, 90% of people said Bill Gates. Right? It was always Bill Gates, Bill Gates, Bill Gates. Now, the reason for that was because Bill Gates was, at the time, in the late 90s, early 2000s, the richest man in the world. He created arguably the biggest company that was making a difference in the world. And then we've seen that sort of the Zuckerberg thing. And it's hard for us sometimes when we think of a Zuckerberg and go, no, Bill Gates was that guy 10, 15 years before Mark Zuckerberg. Right?
Or Steve Jobs. Or
Steve Jobs, right? And those sorts of things. But I always remember talking to somebody very senior from Microsoft once, and he was saying to me, or to a group of people in a meeting I was in, with all the new technologies, this new thing called the internet happening, the new things called, social media platforms taking off, everybody's going to become a Bill Gates or a Mark Zuckerberg. And I sort of held my hand and I said, well, no, they're not. Because no matter what level of technology you massify, there's only 1, 2, 5 people in the world that are going to be that good, right? It's a bit like when we all started putting videos on YouTube. Literally, there was, everybody can be Steven Spielberg. Well, no, there's a reason why Steven Spielberg is the best guy in the world at it, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. But I'm really interested in what you were saying about that desire to sort of get an idea across and come up with a new idea and let's go, and this is it, right?
Right.
Let's not muck around.
Yeah. And there's a contradiction that I just want to explore here as well, because Shannon, you said something really powerful earlier on, that, the importance of purpose, the importance of meaning in what people are doing, the importance of making a change. We've talked literally almost the whole session about that. And yet on the other side, especially in Thailand, we have this addiction to digital in terms of content. Dave, you gave an example of how many hours we spend gaming in Thailand. I think it was about 3.5 hours a day.
Nearly 4 hours a day for the average person between 15 and 35.
Right. So on one side, we have this superficial consumption of continuous stimulus through our digital media, through our mobile phones. On the other side, we are wanting meaning in life, something deep, something profound, something that will change the world and not just gratify the moment, right? How do we explain this? Because many marketeers will never think about the purpose side. They will continue to feed the digital consumption of TikTok or IG or whatever in order to somehow catch the attention of this group of people. And yet they miss completely that sometimes this group of people are also looking for meaning in what they're doing. Just a thought. I thought it was a really interesting contradiction that came up.
I agree. I agree with that. It's ironic, isn't it? How that can happen. The quick bit is, I don't know. I mean, my kids are 10 and they are they wake up in the morning. I have to make sure I take their phones away from them. It was initially there for safety reasons, right? Because they walk to school. But I had to take it away from them because if not, they're on TikTok, YouTube, and I'm listening to what they're listening to, right? And it's like shorts of girls in high school talking about a guy or girl or friend or situation or something. It's about a guy giving away big prizes online, not like Oprah, right? Not to people who like are hungry and need it. It's more like, oh, I have $1 million today. Let me give away this house. I don't know if you've seen this guy, but I have no idea what they're listening to. Although there are times when I'm like, having dinner with the kids, and then all of a sudden they bring up this like very interesting factual point about, I don't know, like the society or something. And I'm like, where'd you listen to that? YouTube.
Yeah.
So there's something there, right?
Definitely.
My hope. So I have two things to say about that. One, because they were born in a digital world already, back in the day where we were doing our reports or whatever and citing our sources and encyclopedias and whatever, right? We knew how to find out where were the true sources of facts, right? Whereas today, I think there's like, even when I hire people, millennials don't know how to note take. They just don't. Gen Z don't know how to note take. They also don't know how to do a report. Right. Especially now with AI, we don't even know where that's going to go. Right. But like how they're going to the fact check, but they don't even know how to do their report and figure out. It's like this whole like verbal diarrhea, just diarrhea, it's just everywhere. And nobody knows how to filter what it is. And so my hope, well, number one, I think that because of that fire hydrant that's happening, marketers are taking advantage of that. But I think it will self-correct.
Right.
I hope. At one point, right? At least a little bit at one point, because again, middle-aged talking, right? But I'm hoping that there's something there where, like even when my kids were like, no, but mommy, this. And I'm like, oh, okay, you are learning something. Okay. And how did you find that out? Now it's not just wiki. Now it's like, okay, we went to this news media and then this, although there's some people that also say, oh, mainstream, don't listen to mainstream. Anyway, that's a whole nother issue.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, it is. And, it's funny because the way you were just describing the way in which they go look for information and, et cetera, literally it reminded me and probably when you were about the age of your kids, there was this thing called cable TV that became invented.
Right.
And you might remember, you might have read about, there was the famous speech that Mr. Murdoch gave about the launch of 500 channels in every home. And it was actually quite often pictured as a fire hydrant just opened up into people's houses, would knock you over with all this stuff. And I think if you go back, I remember reading the same thing about the launch of the printing press 500 years ago. So unfortunately, Shannon, I'm not too sure. It's just going to get more and more. It's never got less. It's just got more and more, right?
True.
But the interesting thing is that through it all, what's interesting to me is, and sometimes as an old guy, of course, I can sit there and go, yeah, but, they'll never learn to. And then you turn around and find out, well, no, people are learning to filter stuff, but in a different way than other generations may have done.
Yeah.
So I think that's there. The thing I wanted to just ask you about for a few minutes, and before we got in air, you gave an example, right? So I'm just going to tell that story again that I explained about when I first got in the advertising industry back in the mid-'80s. I knew nothing about advertising. I'd been a public servant. So after a few months, I finally got the courage up and went up to the head creative guy in our agency in Sydney that I was working for. He was a famous creative director, made award-winning ads around the world. And I said to him, look, I don't understand this business, How do you make a TV commercial that works? And his answer was, well, it's pretty simple. He said, it's actually up to you. What do you mean? He goes, well, you're the researcher guy. I said, well, what's that got to do with me? And he goes, well, next time we get a brief from a client, it doesn't matter what the category, what the product, you have to tell me exactly who is the target.
Yeah.
Down to the year that they were born. And I said, why? And he goes, because then I'll find out when they were 18, what was the number one song, and we buy that song or one just like it, and we use it as the backing track. Now, then, when I told you that before, you chucked out an example of when you were 18, right? Like, what was the song, right? What was the thing, and we'll all have those. What's interesting to me is going forward, as I think about today's 16, 17, 18-year-old, a few years older than your kids, but what's the backing track to their lives now, and how will that be used in the future, right? Because that it's essentially eternally true. And I just always sort of sit there and go, well, what is going to be in 10, 20 years' time? What's that thing when we reach them when they're 28, 38, when they're now mothers or parents, or if we have kids in 20 years' time, maybe nobody has kids in 20 years' time. But what is that backing track that's going to be around, and how's that going to work?
Yeah.
That's a good question, because I think that means I need to go back and study Taylor Swift lyrics right now.
Right.
Because that's going to be, right?
That's going to be what they're going to be relating to.
Yeah, because actually it makes a lot of sense. So my year, all my girlfriends, we all grew up on Cyndi Lauper, Girls Just Want to Have Fun.
Yeah.
And Madonna.
Yeah.
And this dawn of women empowerment and all this stuff. So like it really has, I could see, Sweet, our friend, right? We could really see a whole generation really kind of take this on.
Take it
and
on,
it's
right.
Stuck with us for, 30, 40 years now?
And the joke in my house is my kids are both in their 20s and 30s now, but when they were teenagers, it was, oh, my God, Dad must be home because AC/DC was playing. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because literally, I saw AC/DC playing at my high school dance.
Right.
That's how old I am, but that's how it then became the backdrop to my life. And for you, it might be Cyndi Lauper or whoever it is.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting how we take on some of it's chicken and egg, right? Those performers and the songs that really catch on are both the things that define our age group and, our generation, but they're also something that mattered at the time and caught on at the time to make them the things that stick, right?
Yeah.
So they were saying something in some way, or the beat or the look or whatever it was, right? So it'll be interesting going forward as we go forward. from 2024, what's the thing in 10, 20 years' time that's going to be the thing that sticks?
Yeah. No, it's important because as marketeers, we don't often look at those emotional tags that we have experienced and then go back. We look at the moment that is today. We don't go back in time into when they were being influenced by music or culture or or individuals in some cases, because for many of them that was a formation moment for them where they changed an opinion or they followed a dream or whatever the case might be. And I think for this group of people, this is really defining moments, what they're experiencing today in terms of music, in terms of art, in terms of social media now, are defining the way that they're going to be thinking and behaving going forward. Really, really important.
That's really useful and beneficial because here I am, single mom, trying to think what to do for my kids. They're twins, and it's summer break, and it's like, how do I? But knowing that this age, I know they're not 14 or 15 yet, but knowing that this is the gap where we build this everlasting, pivotal formation of ideas. Which, okay, if you want to go back to branding, it will last them another 30 years.
Yeah.
So that's amazing, right? So it is quite a thought.
It is really important.
So let me just skip into that because you just mentioned in terms of branding and stuff. I know that's not really your business and what you do, but when you think about can you think about a brand or a couple of brands that you think do a good job of getting things that stick?
For the identity.
Yeah, for that sort of age group. Yeah. Not for you personally, or maybe,
Yeah, I was having a hard think about this. I was trying to see what the university students were using and also what maybe my kids are a bit too young, but still, So the biggest one, some of the ones that kind of came up were Spotify, Tinder. Like Tinder was a big one. I had, because that's self-expression, right? Yeah. Okay. I think that one goes with self-expression. Spotify, also self-expression, being able to personalize, understand who I am. I think, and then they have a lot of experiential stuff as well. It's like online and offline. And there's a lot of celebrities that highlight what they're doing, which basically emphasizes and validates what they're doing, right? So I think those are kind of the top of mind that come up. In terms of FMCG brands, unfortunately, the only brands that come up for me are like big, like snacks or superficial things, like these toys that come up. Like I don't have a brand this really is irony again. Yeah. Right? Yeah. They want purpose-driven, but then I can't think of any purpose-driven ones that stick in this TikTok. I mean, is that purpose-driven? I don't think so.
No. Right. Interesting.
But it's interesting what you said about experiential, right? Because I think that's one of the things, if you go back over decades and you look at this age group, the brands that sort of really did stick, there was always an essence of it being experiential, whether or not it was whether or not it was a pop drink or it was, a pair of jeans or it was an online, dating thing or think of the music business itself, right? So Spotify today versus, radio stations when I was young or particular, et cetera, channels from about the experience. Right? And they crave experience. So you've got to be able to give that to them in some way.
Yeah. I think I would just add that experience and meaning. And I would think, these mini brands that it might not be save the world, but it might be bringing friends together, or it might be, so important in our culture here in Thailand is family. right? So really something that brings families together. But having brands that actually give an element of meaning to lives tend to be those that certainly stick for me. Right. So the final question, Shannon, would be really, what piece of advice would you give marketers or teams who are really trying to connect with this group of identity builders, as we've termed it? What would it be? What would be 3 pieces of advice that you would offer them?
Well, one big main advice is to actually spend time with them. And it's not just a consumer survey, it's not just a market research, it's not just a Google form. I think really trying to understand, because they say something. For example, we spent all session today talking about how they want purpose and everything, right? When I spent a whole term with them, a lot of the things that actually came out was like loneliness and the fact that they don't know how to connect. So they might want purpose, but they don't know how to get there. And they have all these different things, which maybe I'm approaching it more from a product developer, because it's more of like really understanding the root cause.
Right.
And yes, we all say purpose, but then as you highlighted, it's a big contradiction right now, right? So I feel that, like, when I was working with the students a lot, they thought they knew what they wanted. This is what they say, but their actions actually say something very different because they're still 18, right? So I feel like they kind of needed that mentorship, that coach, that something that, for example, I was doing some research and I was like, what FMCG brands do resonate to this age group now? And one of them said Nike. And I'm trying to understand why. And I'm like, okay, because Nike's been around for ages. But I feel that it's because it's showing them something. It's mentorship, it's coaching. It's like, just do it, right? And how? And so I think my biggest, we say this a lot in tech and product development, like just talk to the user, but I think it's more than that. I think it's just spending a lot of time trying to understand their habits, what they do, how they scroll. I think that's the biggest thing I would take away from this.
Brilliant. Yeah, very much. Very agree with you. I think you can't tell what a person feels by watching them through a glass window and basically having them talk into a microphone to staged questions. You really have to spend time with them.
Yeah, and as marketers, like, it's emotional.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So if we don't get down to the emotional and we just do the checklist, okay, purpose-driven, transparent, authenticity, okay, get it. But like, how? And so I think that's what's missing sometimes.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Dave, do you want to?
No, I think that was great. I think
it's
fantastic that you finished up with basically the theme that we've got on this series, which is what matters is what matters, right? Dig deep into people, find out the emotion, what's driving them, how they react to things. So thanks very much for summing up what we're trying to get across. That was great. Thank you, Shannon. And
thank you for having me.
I hope we catch up again soon.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more about your music tastes and how they reflect you being your 18-year-old music tastes. Okay.
Yeah, I would love to understand that too.
That would be great.
Thanks for having me, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you on our next podcast, which will be in about a month's time. All right. Thanks so much. And thanks again, Shannon. Bye, everyone. Thank you for listening to What Matters to People. Subscribe, share, and join the conversation. Until next time.